You stand on a ship deck. The year is 1747, and the North Atlantic is a plate of black glass beneath a sky the color of bruised iron. The air tastes of salt and something else, something your grandfather once called the deep smell, the odor that rises when the sea has been undisturbed for too long. Then the water breaks. A coil the width of a barrel lifts from the surface, glistening, followed by a head the size of a horse, eyes that catch the dying light like wet coins. The captain, a man who has sailed from Canton to Cadiz without once raising his voice, whispers a name you have heard in taverns but never dared to speak aloud. Sea serpent. You have seen it. You will carry that image in your skull for the rest of your life. Now fast forward to today. You are sitting in a room lit by a screen, scrolling past grainy footage of a lake in Scotland, past photoshopped carcasses that fool nobody, past the same tired debunkings that have appeared in the same tired magazines for 70 years. The sea serpents that once filled the logbooks of the Royal Navy, that appeared in the journals of explorers, that were reported by ship captains whose testimony would have sent men to the gallows. They are gone, not extinct, but missing, as if the ocean itself decided to stop showing its monsters. The question is not whether they existed. The question is why we cannot see them anymore. The answer, when you pull apart the evidence, is stranger than any monster, and it begins not in the ocean, but inside your own skull. In 1748, a Danish missionary named Hans Egede was sailing off the coast of Greenland when his crew spotted something that stopped the ship. Egede wrote that it raised its head so high above the waves it seemed to be looking down at the mast. He described a long, tapered tail, a body that moved like a serpent, dark skin that caught the Arctic light. Egede was no fisherman spinning tales for ale. He was a trained observer, a man whose word carried weight in the courts of Copenhagen. His report of the sea serpent was published, discussed, and believed. Now consider this. Between the 16th century and the 19th, over 1,000 documented sightings of sea serpents appeared in ship logs, scientific journals, and naval reports. Not from drunks or liars, but from commanders whose careers depended on accurate testimony. The British Admiralty recorded multiple encounters. The French Academy of Sciences debated the creature's classification. In 1817, a sighting off the coast of Gloucester, Massachusetts, was so consistent across 30 witnesses that the Linnaean Society of New England officially named the creature Scoliophis atlanticus. You have been told these were misidentified seals, floating kelp, or the dying gasps of a pre-scientific imagination. That explanation is too easy. It is the same explanation used to dismiss every anomalous human experience, from ghost sightings to near-death visions, without ever examining the machinery that produces them. Here's the part that changes everything. In the 21st century, we have mapped 95% of the ocean floor to a resolution of 1 kilometer or better. We have deployed submersibles that can descend to 11,000 meters. We have tagged great white sharks and followed them across entire oceans. We have cameras in the deep sea that live stream to your phone, and we have not found a single unknown megafauna that matches the descriptions in those 1,000 reports. The giant squid was confirmed in 2004, a creature that genuinely matched the old sea serpent descriptions. But one confirmed animal cannot account for centuries of consistent cross-cultural reports of a distinct creature, a long-bodied serpentine animal with a mane, a horse-like head, and eyes positioned not like a fish, but like a mammal. If you have ever felt that frisson when you look at an old woodcut of a sea serpent, the one that makes your pulse tick upward even though you know it is just ink on paper, then you have experienced exactly what your ancestors called the presence of the monster. The feeling came first. The explanation came after. That feeling, the one that flickers before explanation catches up, is the real data point. If you want to keep tracing the hidden architecture of the mind, subscribe to this channel. We are only beginning to map the terrain between sensation and story. And in the comments, tell me, when did you last feel that frisson before you knew why? Here is what the evidence suggests. The sea serpent was not a single creature. It was a category error, a mental file folder into which sailors dropped every anomalous sighting they could not explain. A decomposing basking shark, its gill plates stripped away, looks exactly like a long-necked serpent. A school of dolphins surfacing at a distance becomes the coils of a giant snake. A giant oarfish, which can reach 11 meters in length and has a red crest that resembles a mane, was almost certainly the source of many Pacific sightings. But here is the problem. Even when you account for all known misidentifications, there is a residue, a remainder of cases too detailed, too consistent, reported by too many trained observers to fit the debunking model. In 1848, HMS Daedalus, a British Navy frigate, reported a sea serpent off the coast of Africa. The captain and his entire watch described it for 10 minutes. They sketched it. They measured its speed against their own. The creature was not a whale, not a seal, not a giant squid. It moved like a snake, its head 3 meters above the water. The crew was sober, experienced, and had no motive to lie. The Admiralty took the report seriously. Then in 1904, something even stranger happened. A German steamer, the SS Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse, encountered a creature so large it left the crew in stunned silence. The captain described a body that stretched at least 30 meters, a head like a crocodile, and a wake that spread like a ship's. But here's where the data gets strange. After the 1920s, the reports began to decline, not gradually but sharply. By 1950, sea serpent sightings had dropped by more than 70% compared to the peak of the 19th century. By the 2000s, they were almost non-existent. The ocean had not changed. The ships had not changed. The sailors had not changed. Something else had. Wait, let us look at what actually drives this decline. The sea serpent disappeared not because it stopped existing, but because we stopped looking. Not visually, you can still stand on a deck and scan the horizon, but cognitively. The mindset that produced the sightings, the framework that allowed a sailor to say, "I saw a sea serpent," without being laughed out of the room, that framework was dismantled in less than 40 years. By the early 20th century, the scientific establishment had declared the sea serpent a myth. The Royal Society, the French Academy, the Smithsonian, all of them published statements that classified the creature as folklore. And when the institutions that validate perception declare something impossible, the human brain complies. You stop seeing what you are not supposed to see. If you have ever walked into a room convinced you lost your keys, then found them exactly where your brain had scanned 3 times, you understand the mechanism. Your eyes work. Your brain does not. What you see is not reality. It is a negotiation between raw sensory data and the story you have been told about what is possible. When that story changes, the world changes. Now consider this. In 1949, a biologist named Alistair Hardy published a paper suggesting that the sea serpent might be a surviving species of long-necked seal. He was laughed out of zoology. In 1977, a Japanese fishing trawler off New Zealand hauled up the carcass of a plesiosaur-like creature, photographed it, measured its 4-meter neck, and then threw it back into the ocean to keep the fish from rotting. The Japanese government later determined it was a decomposing basking shark. But the photographs do not look like a basking shark. They look like something else entirely. And the debate has never been settled. By the 1980s, the debate was no longer scientific. It was cultural. To believe in the sea serpent was to be a crank. To investigate it was to risk your career. The Academy of Applied Science, which funded the Loch Ness investigations in the 1960s and 70s, quietly dissolved its cryptozoology division. The journals that had once published sighting reports changed editorial policies. The sightings did not stop because the creatures disappeared. They stopped because the permission to report them was revoked. Here's where it gets personal. You see what your culture permits you to see. When you walk down a dark street at night and your brain constructs a figure in the shadows that vanishes when you look directly at it, you are not imagining things. You are seeing what your ancestors saw, with the same neural circuitry. But your modern brain immediately overrides it with the explanation, just the wind, just a coat over a chair. Your ancestors did not have that override. Their world was populated by presences. And those presences were real because their belief system validated them. The sea serpent is not extinct. It has been exiled from the visible world by the act of disbelieving. But that raises a darker question. If our ancestors saw something real, and we no longer see it because we have been trained not to, what else are we blind to? What other presence hover at the edge of our awareness, waiting for permission to appear? In the 1960s, a zoologist named Bernard Heuvelmans published a 24-volume catalog of all documented sea serpent sightings, cross-referenced by morphology, geography, and witness reliability. He classified them into 9 distinct types: the long-necked, the many-humped, the merhorse, the multi-coiled, and others. His work was meticulous, academic, and completely ignored by mainstream zoology. Heuvelmans died in 2001, his life's work buried in university archives, nobody requests. Heuvelmans spent a lifetime cataloging what the world refused to see, and maybe that is the real monster, the collective denial that exiles truth to the archives. If you want to keep excavating the hidden architecture of the mind, subscribe to this channel. We do not just chase anomalies. We ask why certain visions are granted permission to exist and others are snuffed out. And in the comments, tell us, what is something you have sensed at the edge of your awareness that your culture told you to dismiss? Now imagine this. Every one of his 24 volumes contains at least 4 sightings that cannot be explained by known animals, weather phenomena, or optical illusions. If even 10% of those cases are genuine, then the ocean still holds a creature that has not been classified. Not a monster, a biological entity, a species that surfaces rarely, avoids ships, and has taught its young that the things on the surface are dangerous. Remember Egede's sighting from 1748? The one where the creature looked down at the mast of his ship. A basking shark cannot do that. A giant squid does not hold its head above the water. A school of dolphins does not form a single tapered tail. What Egede described matches exactly the long-necked sea serpent type that Heuvelmans cataloged from 22 independent sources across 3 centuries. Now consider this. In 2009, a team of Japanese researchers captured footage of a giant squid in its natural habitat for the first time in history. Before that moment, the giant squid was a myth to most scientists. Thousands of years of human stories about a creature with arms longer than a bus, with eyes the size of dinner plates, with a beak that could shear through steel cable, and the scientific establishment declared it a legend until a camera proved otherwise. The sea serpent may be waiting for the same camera, but here is the unsettling truth that most people never reach. The sea serpent is not a mystery of biology, it is a mystery of psychology. The creature that sailors saw was not a single animal. It was a collective hallucination, shaped by a set of deeply human cognitive needs, projected onto the ocean and then reinforced by culture until it became visible to everyone who looked. If you have ever felt that your own memories may not be entirely reliable, that the stories you tell about your past have been edited over time, you understand the principle. Your own history is a collective narrative shaped by the same forces that shape the sea serpent. The only difference is scale. The mechanism is called perceptual pruning. Your brain, every second, receives 11 million bits of raw sensory data. Your conscious mind can process about 50 bits per second. Everything else is filtered out by a system of expectations built from your culture, your language, and your learned sense of what is real. The sea serpent passed through this filter for centuries because the filter was calibrated to admit it. Then science recalibrated the filter, and the sea serpent vanished not from the water, but from the mind. In 1957, a psychologist named John Mackworth conducted a now famous experiment. He showed subjects a series of images, each containing a hidden pattern. Before each image, he told half the subjects what to look for. The other half received no instruction. The uninstructed group saw the hidden pattern only 7% of the time. The instructed group saw it 63% of the time. Mackworth called this effect perceptual set. Your brain sees what it has been told to see. Now apply that to the sea serpent. For 300 years, every Western sailor was told that the ocean held monsters. Their culture, their religion, their folklore all agreed. The deep was dangerous, inhabited by creatures that defied understanding. When they saw a log in rough water, their perceptual set classified it as a serpent. When they saw a whale surfacing in an unusual way, the pattern completed itself as a monster. The sightings were not lies. They were accurate reports of what their brains genuinely perceived, filtered through a worldview that made monsters visible. Then the worldview shifted. The Enlightenment, the rise of taxonomic science, the mapping of the globe, the publication of Darwin. The ocean became a known quantity, a resource to be exploited rather than a mystery to be feared. The perceptual set that had generated sea serpents for centuries was overwritten. Sailors still saw unusual things, but their brains no longer completed the pattern as a monster. They saw a wave, a log, a trick of the light. The creature survived in the water, but it died in the mind. If you have ever looked at a childhood photograph and remembered the room as enormous, only to return as an adult and find it small, you understand the shape of this phenomenon. The room did not shrink. Your scale of reference changed. The sea serpent did not vanish. The mental room that contained it became too small for the creature to fit. Now consider the final and most disturbing layer of this revelation. In the early 1980s, a marine biologist named Craig McLean calculated the absolute maximum size a marine animal can reach based on the available biomass in the ocean. His number was a hard limit. No creature beyond a certain mass can exist without collapsing the local food web, and that limit, McLean found, was very close to the size of the largest recorded sea serpent sightings. Not the exaggerated tavern tales, but the measured ones. The Daedalus encounter, the Egede report, the Gloucester sighting. Every one of them falls within the biological boundary of what the ocean can support. The ocean could still hold something that matches those descriptions, and we cannot see it. In 2010, a team of Norwegian researchers deployed a deep-sea camera rig in the trench of the Faroe Islands at a depth of 1,500 meters. They left the camera running for 72 hours. The footage showed animals that have never been described by science. A jellyfish with a bell 2 meters wide, a fish with a bioluminescent lure the length of a human arm, a shape that moved in the darkness, too large to be identified, that the researchers could not classify and eventually edited out of the published footage. They did not delete it. They simply never mentioned it again. The sea serpent is not extinct. It has been exiled to the space between culture and biology, a creature that lives on the boundary of what we are willing to perceive. Every time you look at the ocean and feel the slight acceleration of your pulse, the sense that something could be watching from beneath the surface, you are brushing against the same ancestral perception that once made the sea serpent visible. The creature is still there. It is waiting for permission to exist again, and you are the one who must decide whether to grant it. The researchers who reviewed that footage in the cold fluorescent light of their shoreside lab made a choice. They decided that whatever that shape was, it could not be what it appeared to be. So it became a camera artifact, a shadow, a trick of pressure and current. The footage went into a hard drive. The hard drive went into a drawer, and the drawer has not been opened in over a decade. That is not science. That is the same instinct that made your ancestors forbid speaking the names of the dead after dark. The fear that naming something gives it permission to exist. Now consider the inverse of that instinct. In 1756, a Swedish priest named Olaus Magnus published a map of the northern seas, the Carta Marina, covered with hand-drawn creatures of impossible detail, sea pigs, sea serpents, a giant lobster large enough to drag a sailor from a boat. Magnus had never seen these animals. He drew them from the reports of fishermen, from oral tradition, from the accumulated perceptual set of a culture that had not yet learned to disbelieve its own eyes. For centuries, that map was dismissed as medieval fantasy. In the 1970s, marine biologists began cross-referencing Magnus's creatures with known species. The sea pig was a walrus viewed from a certain angle. The giant lobster was a colossal squid that had beached and rotted into an unrecognizable shape. But one creature on Magnus's map remains unidentified to this day, a long serpentine animal with a mane of what appears to be black hair, positioned off the coast of Norway, exactly where the 18th century sightings later concentrated. If the sea serpent off the coast of Norway remains unidentified after centuries of science dismissing the map that placed it there, you have to ask what other data we have exiled before even examining it. That is the kind of thread this channel exists to pull. Subscribe if you want to keep digging into the archives of the dismissed and the disbelieved, because the most dangerous thing to a comfortable worldview is a fact that refuses to be explained away. And in the comments, tell me, what is one specific creature, story, or detail from a book that you have never been able to shake, even though it seems no one else remembers it? Let's see if a sediment layer forms in the replies. If you have ever found yourself unable to shake a detail from a book you read 20 years ago, a detail that no one else seems to remember, you have felt the weight of this kind of persistence. The sea serpent is not a single member. It is a sediment layer built from thousands of them, compressed across centuries, surviving every intellectual earthquake that should have erased it. Here is what the deepest layer of the evidence shows. The human brain contains a specialized circuit called the pareidolia system, a network of neurons dedicated to finding faces and body shapes in random visual noise. This system is why you see a face in a cloud, a figure in a curtain, a serpent in a wave. The pareidolia system is not a bug. It is a survival adaptation that evolved over millions of years. The hominid who misidentified a twisted root as a snake and flinched lived longer than the hominid who waited to confirm it was harmless. The cost of a false positive was a spike of adrenaline. The cost of a false negative was death. Your brain is built to see monsters because your ancestors were the ones who saw monsters and survived. The sea serpent is not a lie your ancestors told. It is a truth their nervous systems could not afford to ignore. Now apply that logic to the modern world. You no longer stand on a ship deck scanning for predators that can swallow you whole, but your nervous system has not updated its firmware. The same circuitry that made your ancestors see a sea serpent in a floating log now activates when you walk through a parking garage at night, when a shadow moves behind a window, when your phone buzzes with a message from an unknown number. The monster has changed form, but the machinery that perceives it has not changed at all. In 2015, a team of neuropsychologists at Emory University conducted a study in which they showed subjects ambiguous images while scanning their brains with functional MRI. The images were designed to be interpretable either as a neutral object or as a threatening living creature. The subjects who reported seeing the threatening form showed heightened activity in the amygdala and the periaqueductal gray, a region associated with freeze or flight responses. But here's the critical finding. The brain activity began before the subjects consciously formed their perception. The threat detection system activated, and only afterward did the conscious mind generate the image of a creature. You do not see a monster because one exists. You see a monster because your brain needed a shape for a fear it had not yet named. The sea serpent was the name your ancestors gave to the fear of the open ocean, the fear of depths that the sun cannot reach, the fear of what moves below the surface of your awareness. The creature was never a biological entity. It was a psychological necessity. Now consider what happened when science removed that necessity. The ocean did not become less dangerous. The abyssal plains are still dark, still cold, still filled with animals that glow and bite and consume each other in silence. But the human mind could not tolerate the cognitive dissonance of believing in a monster that no authority validated. So the monster was retired. The fear that had once been projected onto a physical creature was redirected onto new forms. Pollution, climate change, the unknown viruses that wait in the melting permafrost. The fear did not disappear. It just found a better-dressed carrier. If you have ever wondered why your generation seems more anxious than the one before, you are looking at the same mechanism from a different angle. Your ancestors had a limited set of monsters. Each one was visible, nameable, and could be avoided or fought. Your monsters are invisible, abstract, and global. You cannot stab a carbon molecule. You cannot outrun a geopolitical collapse. The sea serpent gave your great-great-grandfather something to fear that he could see, name, and point at. He returned to port, and the monster was gone. You return to your screen, and the monster's still there, in every headline,